Tragic accidents in Formula One were not rare, but none were as brutal, horrific, and outright disgraceful as that of Zandvoort 1973. While drivers raced on, a young racing prodigy was literally burning alive on the track in only his second ever race. But no one was there to help him. In the moment he needed it most, he was neglected. This is a story of the loss of a legend, the appearance of an unlikely hero, and the most shameful moment in Formula One history. To fully understand this story, let us go back to when a young man by the name of Roger Williamson was rising through the racing ranks. During the late 1960s and early 70s, he was a master at saloon car racing and beat multiple racing icons at a very young age.
And number 196 in the Anglia Hall Bay, Roger Williamson has won.
Remarkably, in one of his first Formula 3 drives at Silverstone, he destroyed the competition and won by over 14 seconds, cementing himself as a young prodigy in the making. In fact, he would continue this with a streak by winning in France, Sweden, France once again, and 4 times in England to dominate F3, winning 2 championships that year. So, safe to say, heading into 1973, many eyes were on him as a promising talent. But while most of this was happening, it's important to mention another promising driver during this time, David Purley. During the 1972 season, he competed in multiple races throughout the Formula 2 European Championship and even in a non-championship F1 race before his car malfunctioned. But hey, it was a good start, and in 1973, with his family's backing, he gave Formula One a try. So, this brings us to the 1973 British Grand Prix, where Roger Williamson made his debut with the March F1 team. Sadly, his race ended pretty quickly, crashing out on the very first lap. Yeah, it wasn't the best of starts, as Jody Scheckter took out around half of the field, Williamson included. Luckily, this didn't matter much because he was still set to drive at the next race only a week later. Little did he know that this next race would prove to be F1's darkest day. After a rain-soaked practice, Roger Williamson achieved a pretty disappointing 18th position in qualifying. But in all fairness, the car they gave him wasn't the best. To make matters even worse, however, since his car refused to start during the formation lap, he was forced to start from the back row. But Williamson was undeterred. As the flag dropped, he impressively overtook 8 drivers by the 7th lap, going from 20th to 13th place. As he began the 8th lap, he was just ahead of his old friend David Purley, who was competing in his 3rd ever Formula One race. Williamson was pushing to the absolute limit. Nothing was holding him back. He had to show what he was capable of, and he was doing exactly that. Unfortunately, at one of the fastest corners of the track, things would take a tragic turn. Williamson's tire had exploded, and he violently hit the barriers before being catapulted back onto the track. Then, his car was dragged upside down for over 275 meters, with the car catching fire in the middle of the track. Despite such a horrific crash, Roger Williamson was actually not even seriously injured. Instead, he was stuck inside and couldn't get out. As soon as the crash took place, David Purley immediately stopped his car and got out in an attempt to rescue him. Despite a driver literally burning alive on the track, the race wasn't even stopped. and the most they did was put up some yellow flags around that area. This meant that Dave had to cross the track with drivers racing live on the track in an attempt to reach Williamson's car, which is crazy considering how safety is now in Formula 1. Dave Purley tried to push the car upright to get Williamson out of the car, but he wasn't capable of doing it himself. As the marshals approached the place of the incident, they just stood there. While Williamson was shouting and begging for help, they didn't do anything. They thought that Purley was the one that crashed, and they didn't know that Williamson was the one in need of help. There was only a single fire extinguisher in the area, and it was not enough to put out the fire that the crash had caused. In a desperate last attempt, he told the marshals to help him push the car upright. However, they quickly backed out because of the intense heat. Some spectators even went into the track to try and help, but just like the marshals, the heat was just too much. And so, the situation became hopeless. As the clock ticked, Williamson's situation grew worse while the race continued at full speed. Then, a marshal who had done absolutely nothing to help tried to take Purley away from the crash site, to which he responded aggressively. But the worst part about all of this is how there was a fire truck only 150 yards away from where Williamson crashed. However, because the race officials refused to stop the race, the fire truck was not deployed until 6 minutes later, and even after it started moving, it had to do an entire lap around the track before it reached the crash site. Purley tried waving at the drivers to come, but just like the marshals, they thought Purley had crashed and had no idea it was Williamson who was burning to death. In the end, he passed away from asphyxia due to the lack of oxygen. It was clear that the negligence of unprepared and careless track officials and marshals had cost Williamson his life. This was one of Formula 1's most shameful moments, as dying on impact is one thing, but passing away because of ignorance and irresponsibility is a whole other. In the end, Jackie Stewart won the race. Nevertheless, even he was at loss of words for what had just happened.
Williamson's dead. There's no lap of honour. Quiet presentation.
Unfortunately, things wouldn't get better just yet. In the following year, a barrier that was insecurely installed caused Helmuth Koenig to literally get decapitated and lose his life from what was only a small crash. More infamously, however, was the tragic incident of Tom Price, where the race was not stopped and the safety marshals crossed the track mid-race, causing the horrific death of Price and the marshal. As for Dave Purley, he continued racing in motorsports for a few more years before switching to competition aerobics. Sadly, his life was also cut short at the age of 40 in an aviation crash back in 1985. So, this brings us to the present. The sport is much safer, with accidents that would be fatal back then only leaving a couple small injuries. We will never truly know how good Roger Williamson could have been, but there is no doubt that he left his mark in the world of Formula 1 as a racing prodigy that was sadly gone too soon.